The sound of silence filled the air as Keith walked to the park. His phone remained stubbornly quiet. As a child, he had always longed to experience the wonder and excitement of his first trip to the park again. And now, seeing Nettie explore it for the first time in her life, he was able to do just that. Her eyes were wide with amazement as she took in the trees and nature surrounding them. For Nettie, every day was a new adventure, and Keith felt a strong urge to show her more of the world through her innocent perspective. "I don't come here often, but I know I should," Keith said wistfully. The morning sunlight filtered through the leaves and cast dancing shadows all around them as Nettie hopped onto a swing and started soaring through the air. "When was the last time you swung on these?" Nettie asked curiously. "Probably about a month ago, give or take." "I can't remember exactly," Keith replied with a tinge of regret in his voice. "I really should come here more often." "I'll hold you to it." Nettie grinned mischievously as she motioned for him to join her on the swing next to hers. Keith couldn't help but think back to all the times he had invited Angelica to come to this park with him. She always declined, preferring instead to stay in her bedroom at home or make him feel unwelcome when he visited her. But now, as he sat swinging with Nettie by his side, he realized how much he had missed out on because of her reluctance to go out and do things. He made a mental note to cherish these simple moments with Nettie and not take them for granted. "I used to ask Angelica if she wanted to come here, but she never did," Keith admitted quietly. "That's okay," Nettie said reassuringly. "We'll make even better memories here together." And as they swung higher and higher, Keith couldn't help but feel grateful for this new friendship and the joy it was bringing into his life. With driver's education class coming up, he knew he would soon have the freedom to explore even more with Nettie by his side. Nettie nodded, her straight brunette hair constantly shifting directions with each back and forth rise and fall of the park's swing. The warm summer breeze brushed against her cheeks, carrying with it the faint scent of blossoming flowers. "I'm looking forward to joining you in that driver's education class," she said, a hint of excitement in her voice. "It's next year," Keith replied, pushing himself higher on the swing. "Still got a while to go. Until then, it's skateboards and bicycles." "Bicycles!" Nettie exclaimed happily, the sun glinting off her bright blue eyes. Keith matched her ups and downs on the swing next to him, their conversation never ceasing as they swung higher together. His medium-length blonde hair danced in the wind, strands falling gently across his forehead. "You want to get some bicycles?" he asked with an amused grin. "I have mine in the garage. Maybe we can ask Mom to get you one too." As they continued swinging, Keith caught sight of 3 figures walking down the street toward them, just past the fence that surrounded the tree-shaded park. One man was short and slender, with spiked hair and a t-shirt featuring a New York City logo paired with baggy blue jeans. Next to him was a tall teenager sporting basketball shorts and a white armless shirt, and next to them a skinny and slender girl with jet black hair wearing tight blue jeans and a blue t-shirt. Shit. Keith's swinging went out of sync with Nettie's as they both slowed down, tension filling the air between them. Nettie looked at Keith questioningly, concern etched on her face. "That's Angelica," Keith explained through gritted teeth. "Who are the 2 boys she's with?" Nettie asked softly. "Chris and Dean," Keith confirmed, his expression darkening. "Damn it, I think they saw us. There's no way out of this park unless we go through them." Nettie and Keith stopped swinging, standing up simultaneously as the gate to the park swung open with a creak. "Keith, buddy a boy," Chris exclaimed with a teasing grin. "I heard you texted your girlfriend and she dumped you." Keith's shoulders slumped in response, but he quickly straightened up as Dean and Angelica joined them. "Not exactly how it happened," Keith corrected, his tone defensive. "She told you if you didn't give her enough attention she would leave you," Dean chimed in with a smirk. "But hey, we just wanted to check if you wanted to stay friends." I'd like that," Keith replied, feeling a mix of relief and disappointment. The group looked to Nettie, who had been quietly observing the exchange with a curious expression. "Yeah, we can stay friends," Angelica said nonchalantly in a monotone voice. Chris took a step back as Dean leaned in to whisper something in Angelica's ear. Nettie instinctively moved closer to Keith, draping an arm around his waist. Dean barely noticed their interaction as he turned to Nettie with a charming smile. "You new here? I've never seen you before." Nettie grinned mischievously. "Yeah, freshly manufactured," she quipped, causing Keith to tense up beside her. Dean let out a boisterous laugh at her answer, clearly amused by her boldness. Dean's outstretched hand reached for Nettie, but she remained firmly tucked under Keith's protective arm. He retracted his hand with a knowing smile and turned to address the group. If you ever need help with homework or anything, just come find us. Keith can show you where to find us, he offered. Angelica's lips curved into a sly smirk at Dean's words. Across from her, Chris displayed a toothy grin in response. I'm Chris, this is Dean, and that's Angelica. He introduced himself, gesturing to each person as he spoke. Keith, isn't it time you introduced me to the new girl? A mischievous glint sparkled in Angelica's eyes as she spoke up. Oh, I think she already introduced herself to me this morning, she teased. That's why I wanted to come down here. Keith may not have found his courage yet, but I could find him with the Friend Finder app. With a wink at Chris, Angelica broke away from his side and approached Nettie and Keith. Not bad, she commented playfully, eyeing Nettie up and down. She's still pretty flat as a board, though there might be some grass starting to grow on the field. Confused by the innuendos flying over his head, Keith furrowed his brow and asked, What do you mean, grass on the field? Instantly, Chris and Dean burst into laughter. Come on, man, Chris chided between chuckles. You've got more tile floor than grass going on down there. Angelica joined in their laughter as Keith stood utterly bewildered by their banter. So is this what you do with Keith all the time? Nettie asked, her voice laced with curiosity. It's just a little teasing. And don't go thinking she was cheating on you, Chris interjected, his tone protective. Yeah, we just go skinny dipping sometimes, so that's why we know. Dean chimed in, a hint of mischief in his voice. Dean. Angelica's voice cut through the air like a sharp blade, betraying her annoyance. Sorry, just explaining, Dean quickly apologized, sensing he had crossed a line. So blowdowns are fair game as long as it's just friends skinny dipping in your eyes. That's not cheating or anything. Nettie prodded, trying to make sense of their unconventional relationship dynamic. Yeah, they're called open relationships. Welcome to the 21st century, Angelica declared, her words dripping with sarcasm. Now that we're all friends, I don't mind. Maybe we can give Keith a little education with benefits. I don't think I'm ready for that, Keith stammered nervously, attempting to back away but feeling Nettie's arm hold him in place. That's why I studied so hard with Dean and Chris, Angelica quipped slyly, causing both Dean and Chris to chuckle at her innuendo. Dean's voice carried through the warm summer air, his pleading tone filled with hope and a hint of desperation. What if we all forgave each other? Let's start fresh. How about that? Minus the benefits. Just a friendly hangout at my pool tonight, he offered, his gaze shifting between Keith and Nettie. Keith stood firm, his jaw clenched in determination. Chris looked hurt by his refusal to give in to Dean's invitation. I promise we won't make fun of your Asperger's, Dean continued, trying to appeal to Keith's vulnerability. Look, we weren't the best friends to you, and despite our past problems, my parents are gone tonight, and we want to invite both of you to our little pool party. It'll just be you, me, Angelica, and... He paused, glancing over at Nettie before adding on a final note, You're invited too, as long as you don't mind being naked. No, we already have plans, Nettie spoke up firmly. Oh, Dean pouted playfully, slapping his chest. Come on, it'll be a fun night of making up for lost time. No more blowdowns, he promised. Angelica chimed in, her tone teasing yet sincere. I'm guessing with your friend's AR technology, you've probably seen me naked already anyways. Might as well make it official. As the group continued their discussion, Keith leaned in closer to Nettie and whispered in her ear, What the hell is a blowdown? Not now, she hissed back, not wanting to draw any more attention to themselves. Can you even swim? He asked with a hint of concern in his voice. Nettie shot him a look before whispering back, Don't worry about it right now. Can we talk about this later? Keith nodded in agreement, his mind racing with conflicting thoughts. On one hand, he had just broken up with Angelica, and her friends were now suddenly inviting them to a pool party. But on the other hand, he didn't have many friends, and maybe this could be a chance to salvage their relationship. When do you want me to come? He finally spoke up, loud enough for the others to hear. Not in the pool, Dean joked, causing Chris and Angelica to burst into laughter. Keith stood there looking confused and uncomfortable. They're leaving around 9 to go to Chicago, right? Chris asked, trying to fill the silence. Oh yeah, Dean confirmed with a nod. He turned back to Keith and Nettie with a hopeful expression. I know it's a school night and all, but we really want to make things up to you guys and apologize. And we also wanted to include you in on all the fun because we know you were kind of left out before. He glanced over at Angelica before adding, we can all still be friends. Well, can I text you? Keith asked Dean, his hands fidgeting nervously in his pockets. Yes, text Dean. We can all make up later for everything that happened, Angelica chimed in with a mischievous grin. Dean nodded, understanding the silent request. All right, we're going to go hiking in the woods a bit. I know you two need to talk amongst yourselves. As they walked away, Angelica turned to Nettie with curiosity. Who are you, though? Nettie smiled warmly. I'm Nettie. I hope you can come, Angelica said earnestly. Dean laughed and nudged Keith playfully. I'd like to try and get her to come, too. Keith blushed and apologized. Sorry about my friend's behavior earlier. I promise to be a gentleman from now on. The three of them disappeared into the dense woods behind the park. Once they were out of sight, Nettie faced Keith and took hold of his arms, looking up at him with concern. They're nothing but a bad influence, she said solemnly. Please just blow off their invitation and let's just hang out with Jack tonight. Keith hesitated. We could do both. And I'd like to at least repair our friendship. Nettie shook her head in disbelief. Your friends just want an excuse to see me naked. And what was Angelica talking about with your friend being able to let you see Angelica naked too? Sighing, Keith pointed towards his backpack on the ground by the park's picnic table. Curious, Nettie rifled through it and pulled out a virtual reality headset. She put it on and immediately scowled as she realized what was on it when she found the right file. But you didn't do that, did you? She asked accusingly. No, it was Jack, Keith admitted guiltily. But he only does that to people he doesn't like. Nettie's expression softened as she removed the headset and placed it back in the bag. Can't wait to meet him, she said with a forced smile. Do you think he's up yet? I can try and call him, Keith offered. Nettie sighed and shook her head. Look, if you want to go, we'll go. I just really think that they're up to no good. Her eyes flicked towards the trees, a sense of unease settling over her. I do want to give them a chance, Keith said, looking Nettie over. But are you okay with seeing me, you know? Nettie raised an eyebrow in response. I think that since you run software that lets you see anyone naked that you want to see naked, it's only fair that I should be able to see you naked. Keith fidgeted and dug his hands into his pockets. What about you? I mean, can you be naked? Are you anatomically correct? A mischievous glint appeared in Nettie's eyes as she leaned in closer. Your mother built me using the same technology used to create sex toys for lonely men. So not only am I anatomically correct, but I can also experience all the physical sensations of having a body except for eating and sleeping. And Keith's mouth gaped open in surprise. And blowdowns? I don't think you're ready to know, Nettie said with a smirk. Okay, Keith replied, averting his gaze to the ground before locking eyes with her again. But Nettie, Jack makes those models and I've never asked to see anyone naked. He just enjoys replicating people he knows and often makes them nude before adding clothing meshes. The whole situation with Marissa was a misunderstanding. Jack gave a mesh of her to someone she bullied and they posted fake pictures on Twitter. She thought I did it and that's why she attacked me when you first saw me. But I don't use the AR glasses solely to see people naked. Nettie blinked in surprise before shaking her head disapprovingly. Despite Jack's moral compass being so skewed that he probably couldn't pass a Boy Scout navigation class, he's still a better friend than these people. Did you hear how Angelica claimed she broke up with you? And Chris doesn't even know you broke up with her, yet she wants you to attend their pool party? Nettie sighed. Something's not right here. Keith ran a hand through his hair and looked at Nettie earnestly. So what do you suggest? Should I turn them down? I don't want to burn bridges, but if you think it's too risky... Nettie paused for a moment before responding. I understand the desire to maintain relationships, but I believe it would be best to distance yourself from these individuals. They clearly have ulterior motives, and it could potentially harm you. Keith's head bobbed in understanding, his gaze fixed on Nettie as she spoke. Her words rang true, and he felt a surge of determination within him. Despite the risks, he wanted to try and salvage their friendship. A warm smile spread across Nettie's face, her eyes crinkling at the corners. You are a good man, for a human. Turning her bony shoulders, Nettie glanced back at Angelica, who was deep in conversation with Chris and Dean. The two men seemed to be calmly discussing something, while Angelica listened intently. Nettie ran a hand through her dark brown hair before returning her bright blue eyes to Keith. She reached under his arms to pull his hands out of his pockets, holding them tightly in her own. We go to this party. I'll keep an eye out for anything wrong, and if I don't like what we see, we get out of there. We just put our clothes on and leave, Nettie explained firmly. Just split? Keith asked, seeking confirmation. Like an atom over New Mexico, Nettie replied with a small smirk. When Keith looked confused, she shrugged it off. Never mind. Yes, let's see if we can mend the bridge, but if I say go, we go. Deal? She intertwined her pinky with his and held up their joined hands. Nettie couldn't help but playfully tease as she studied Keith's features. So, you never peeked at me when I slept next to you last night to know I was anatomically correct. She trailed off with a grin and upward gaze before squeezing his hands tighter in realization. You're supposed to be like a human boy, but your programming is way outside of expected parameters. Keith blinked and grinned back. I'm just not ready for that stuff yet. Maybe she is. Not I. He nodded towards Angelica, who was still engaged in conversation with the others. No, Nettie corrected him. She only thinks she's ready for that kind of stuff. You're smart enough to know and wait. She'll find out one day that you were the one who was further along in relationships, only after she's made all the terrible mistakes you won't ever have to endure. Nettie cast a knowing glance towards the group before turning back to Keith. When it's too late for them, she'll realize she lost the best human being she could have ever asked for. Keith felt a blush spread across his cheeks at Nettie's words, but couldn't hide the smile that crept onto his face. All right, he said decisively. Let's go to Jack's and hang out first. Then we'll go from there to Dean's tonight. Nettie nodded in agreement and turned on her heels, leading the way towards their friend Jack's house. All right, but you aren't doing this just to see me naked, right? We can just take a shower together if that's all you wanted. Keith's deep laughter echoed through the park as they made their way over to Angelica, Chris, and Dean. Yeah, but there's no empty shampoo bottles at Dean's pool. I should feel safer, Keith joked, his eyes twinkling mischievously. Nettie playfully punched his arm and smiled an infectious grin. Well, are you coming or not? Dean asked eagerly. Keith scanned the group of friends, taking in Angelica leaning casually against the fence, Chris rubbing his hands together nervously, and Dean with his hands on his hips, clearly expecting an answer from them. So it's just us here, right? Nobody else? Keith asked cautiously. 4's just a foursome, 5 is a proper orgy, Angelica quipped with a smirk. This earned a chuckle from Chris and Dean, while Keith squinted at them in confusion. Nettie folded her arms and glared at Angelica. Are you guys really here to mend friendships? Or is this going to turn into something more? Nettie demanded pointedly. Rolling her eyes, Angelica retorted, Who are you, anyway? Besides your name, where did you come from? Nettie blinked in surprise. You don't get to answer a question with another question. You answer me first, then I'll answer you. She stood confidently with her arms crossed, refusing to back down. Angelica fell silent for a moment, before realizing that she had been caught off guard. Her mouth hung open slightly before she quickly composed herself and nodded in understanding. Angelica leaned against the wooden fence, her arms crossed over her chest as she surveyed Nettie with a critical gaze. At a few inches taller, Angelica held herself with confidence and poise, her dark irises locked onto Nettie's piercing blue eyes. I won't apologize for anything, Angelica began, but I'm willing to see if we can all do right by what's happened and keep the peace. Her words hung in the air, heavy with tension and unspoken grievances. Dean chimed in, his voice hesitant. We want to include him, but he's just so sheltered it makes us feel, weird. Nettie nodded in agreement, her eyes still fixed on Angelica. With Angelica not being his girl anymore, we thought maybe we could ease him into some things. Chris spoke up next. We can all be on the same page. It's not right to push him out just because he's a little behind. Nettie turned her attention to Keith, who had been silent throughout the conversation. What if he's just not ready? I'm right here, guys, Keith interjected. I may not understand everything you're talking about, but I want to at least be accepted. And despite whatever was going on between you three behind my back, I'm still willing to be friends, Angelica. Angelica nodded thoughtfully. We can be friends, she said with a small smile. Let's just try the pool party and see where it goes. Chris stepped forward and extended his hand to Keith. Nettie kept a close eye on Angelica as Keith shook hands with Chris and then Dean. With a sly grin directed towards Nettie, Angelica walked over to Keith and pulled him into a hug. See you tonight, she whispered seductively into his ear. After a long journey from the park, Keith and Nettie finally arrived at Jack's parents' house. As they approached the front door, loud music blasted through the closed windows, causing them to tremble in their frames. Keith pounded his fist against the door twice, but it was no match for the booming beat of Ace's 10,000 volts. Nettie winced and covered one ear with her finger, a wild grin spreading across her face. The door swung open to reveal an older man with shoulder-length hair and a stubbly gray chin. He stood before them in nothing but boxers, the music almost drowning out his words as he beckoned them inside. Navigating through the cluttered living room filled with empty beer cans, old shirts, and pizza boxes, Keith and Nettie tiptoed around the debris like delicate dancers avoiding landmines. They finally reached Jack's bedroom door and knocked, encountering the same inability to make any sound penetrate the wall of noise coming from inside. Without knocking to announce their presence, Keith cautiously entered first to ensure Jack was fully clothed. Seeing that it was safe, he nodded to Nettie to follow. In stark contrast to the chaos of the rest of the house, Jack's room was surprisingly neat except for the walls, which were covered in a layer of soundproof foam. Once the door shut behind them, the deafening music became muffled vibrations under their feet. Jack had just finished shaving his face and was dressed head to toe in black. Standing tall above Keith and Nettie, his shoulder-length pigtails swayed as he peered down at them through rose-colored glasses. With a look of astonishment on his face, he removed the glasses and opened his mouth wide. "You're his new sister?" Jack spread his arms wide in excitement as Nettie couldn't help but smile and take a hesitant step closer. In an instant, Jack scooped her up in a massive hug before setting her back down. "Damn! You weren't kidding!" Jack exclaimed. "And a lightweight, too. Good thing the old man drank all the alcohol before she got here." He glanced from Keith to Nettie, making a sliding motion with his finger that pointed towards her. "Nothing but water for you, little lady." His grin widened as Keith let out a chuckle. With a gentle tug, Keith pulled out Jack's computer chair for Nettie and then led his best friend over to his bed. He wanted to give Nettie some space of her own in the cramped room. "Hello, Nettie. I'm Jack, the one friend who actually tolerates Keith's company around here," Jack said with a playful smirk as he put on a pair of sunglasses and pretended to have a monocle. Despite his attempts to associate with questionable characters, Nettie couldn't hold back her laughter as she settled into the chair. She raised an eyebrow at Keith, who looked sheepishly at Jack. "I broke up with Angelica," Keith blurted out. In a flurry of excitement, Jack jumped up from the bed and raised his arms triumphantly. "There is a God in heaven," he exclaimed. "Finally!" He sat back down and asked, "And what about the infamous tit-smackers?" Keith looked confused. "What? You know, your old friends Chris and Dean? Did Angelica spill all the juicy details in an angry text to you?" Jack prodded. Nettie leaned forward and shrugged her shoulders. "Well, we're trying to maintain a friendship with them, and Angelica," she added hesitantly. Jack squinted at her and gave Keith a look of disbelief. "Why the hell would you want to do that, man?" he asked. Keith simply shrugged. "Better friends than enemies. They invited us to a pool party tonight." Jack turned to Nettie, pointing at Keith with wide eyes. "You've got your hands full with this idiot," he joked. "Okay, so how did this happen?" He motioned between the two of them. "I mean, I've been to your house countless times. I know the layout like the back of my hand. One master bedroom, one smaller bedroom, and only 2 bathrooms. And with Keith and his new lady friend. Well, you see where I'm going with this. Is he sleeping on the couch?" "Oh no, we're sleeping together," Keith stated. Nettie's eyes widened in surprise, mirroring Jack's expression. "He means we're sleeping in the same room," she quickly corrected. Jack cleared his throat and smoothed out the wrinkles in his shirt, trying to regain some composure after Nettie's unexpected comment. "Normally I'd have a crafty comeback for that one," he said, finally finding his voice. "But it seems you've done quite well on your own without my help." He glanced over at Keith. "So which side of the room are you claiming? How are you planning to divide it up?" "We haven't really thought about it yet," Keith replied, running a hand through his hair. "We've been too busy exploring the town today, and with Dean's pool party featuring Chris and Angelica, we haven't had much time to think about it. Jack offered a bottle of water to Nettie, who shook her head. He then handed the bottle to Keith and grabbed another one for himself, taking a long swig. Keith chuckled. Looks like Jack here hasn't had enough water since we arrived. Never been skinny dipping before either, Keith added with a smirk. Suddenly Jack's body convulsed and he spat out a mouthful of water. Droplets sprayed in all directions. Keith gripped him tightly, holding him steady as he coughed and gasped for air. You're going to get naked with your ex-girlfriend and your sister? Jack exclaimed, water still dripping from his mouth and chin. Nettie paused, her head tilting to the side in thought. Well, when you put it that way, it does sound wrong. It's just a pool party, Keith interjected calmly. Keith, buddy. Jack shook his head in disbelief while still attempting to clear his throat. When the girl you dumped suddenly asks you to do something risky with your reputation, with your own adopted sister no less, don't trust them. Angelica doesn't even know I'm Keith's adoptive sister, Nettie chimed in. All she knows is that we were at the park together, Keith clarified. Jack rolled his eyes in frustration. You guys are playing with fire here. Make sure to call me if this blows up in your faces. I'll be here. He let out a sigh. When are you planning on going over there? 9 o'clock, Keith replied confidently. Well, don't say I didn't warn you, Jack pointed to Keith. He swung his finger over to Nettie. And you really have your hands full.